Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and Your Excellency, and dear Professor Rommel, dear friends and colleagues. Welcome to the school, and it's indeed my pleasure to welcome you here tonight. And this is the last event in a series of roundtables that we had on higher education over the last few years, co-hosted with the U.S. Embassy, ECLA, and us here at Hertie in several instances. And since this will be our last gathering, I really would like to acknowledge Ambassador Murphy. And in many ways, it's a very sad day, because today it was announced that you will be returning to the Federal Republic of New Jersey, as you call it. But I think we owe the very idea of establishing this dialogue to you. And we're indeed very, very deeply indebted to you, Ambassador Murphy, for the initiative you took to establish this roundtable, for suggesting the idea in the first place, and for pushing the agenda, and in many ways for being a political entrepreneur and innovator in the best of all senses. I think experts have long recognized the potential of liberal arts in higher education, and as Professor Rommel can elaborate in much more detail, liberal arts allow students to mature not only into great academics and professionals, but also into great human beings, into good citizens. And the liberal arts evoke the history and cultural expressions of those that have contemplated the human condition, the human existence before us. And very importantly, they call into question the premises by which we live our lives and the premises by which we look at public policy, the premises at which we design and by which we design policies. And very much as a public policy school, this is relevant. It comes to teaching ethics and the normative foundations to the students here at the school. And some of whose will hopefully become future leaders. But as many of you and us have pointed out, and we're aware, that the financial crisis of 2008 and everything that followed, the frequent scandals in government, business and civil society, tell us and amply demonstrate you cannot really be a very good policy analyst without having a sense of the ethics and the normative foundations. You end up being a technocrat at best. So we have to take action at public policy schools to teach ethics and normative foundations, but not only as a soft skill, as it's sometimes as an add-on to a curriculum, but we have to embed it. And this is what we tried at the school. We had long debates when the school was founded and with the faculty over the years, whether we should have a separate course on ethics that is somehow central in the curriculum, or whether we should embed aspects of ethics and normative foundations into all aspects of the curriculum, so that when students leave here, they should not only know about cost-benefit ratios and yield analysis and regression models, they should also know what is behind those numbers, what these numbers mean for people and the ethical considerations involved. But we found that this embedding in the curriculum is actually quite challenging, because easily these ethical aspects are driven out by the demands of a technical and sometimes quite quantitative curriculum. And therefore we have decided here at the school to go the other way and to establish a more dedicated chair, or certainly part of a professoriate here at the school that deals with questions of ethics. But you see, it is a demand-driven factor. It's the students who want it. The students are asking for issues of ethics and normative foundations to be covered. So this is very much what I was looking forward to the meeting today, and also looking forward to talking to you about how we can continue the series. And I understand that there are some proposals already being made on how we can continue this. And but I would close my remarks to say once again how indebted we are to you, Mr. Ambassador, for making it possible and for really being the chaperone of the series for the last 3 years. Thank you, a job well done, and we'll miss you. So.
I'll tell you, we're doing one thing right, I know, at a minimum. The food has gotten much better since we started. I unfortunately have to leave a little bit early, and I apologize in advance to panelists and other speakers who I may miss this evening. So I apologize for that, but I'm mostly upset that I'm going to have another meal after this, and I can't partake of the one that Helmut has laid out for us here at Hertie. So, im Frühjahr 2010 haben einige von uns in diesem Raum eine Reihe von Diskussionen über die Ziele der Hochschulbildung angestoßen. Dies ist der 7. runde Tisch dieser Serie. Heute Morgen habe ich bekannt gegeben, dass ich Berlin Anfang Juli verlassen werde. Daher ist dies das letzte Mal, dass ich als Botschafter an dieser Veranstaltung teilnehme. Ich freue mich sehr, dass ich Ihnen allen heute meinen Dank aussprechen kann. Sowohl denjenigen, die diese Reihe von Anfang an begleitet haben, als auch denjenigen, die heute zum ersten Mal dabei sind. The scope of the discussions we've had so far have gone far beyond the current state of German and U.S. higher education to include issues regarding integration and access to higher education. We've looked at the challenges of education in a globalized world. We have discussed the transition from school to college to the workplace, and the simple truth that within the scope of their careers, the graduates of today will probably have to reinvent themselves many times over. And we have talked a lot about the overlapping purposes of higher education. We all, I think, came to the conclusion that education from kindergarten right through college and university has to develop a sense of the privileges and responsibilities associated with citizenship. Admittedly, that is not a new idea. In one of his first speeches as Secretary of State, John Kerry reminded us that, quote, Thomas Jefferson believed we couldn't be a strong country without investing in the kind of education that empowers us to be good citizens, end of quote. And when 50 years ago, President John F. Kennedy spoke to students at the Freie Universität, he reminded them that their university had been founded by citizens of the world and that it was not interested in turning out merely corporate lawyers or skilled accountants. I suspect if he had given that speech a few years later, he would have included investment bankers in that list, of which I used to count myself among those ranks. He told them, and I quote President Kennedy, what it is interested in, and this must be true of every university, it must be interested in turning out citizens of the world, men who comprehend the difficult, sensitive tasks that lie before us as free men and women, and men, I wish he had said in men and women, but I will say that, who are willing to commit their energies to the advancement of a free society, end of quote. You can't go wrong, Leon, when you quote both Jefferson and John Kennedy in the same, right in the first page. But while the idea of incorporating concepts of citizenship into the educational process is not new, there is sometimes a feeling that on the one hand, our educational institutions are not taking this function seriously enough. And on the other, that young people are not interested. You are the experts on education. I'm the least qualified person in this room to be speaking on these topics. But let me offer this parting observation regarding young people. Over the past 4 years, I have participated in countless town hall discussions with young people. In fact, we're queuing up for one tomorrow in Hanover and another one on Friday here in Berlin. I've also attended a number of commencement ceremonies just yesterday, by the way, at Ekla Bad, or Bad Ekla. Is it Ekla Bad or Bad Ekla? Ekla Bad. Ekla comes first. I believe Leon is the one who wrote Bad Ekla in my speech, but I'm not sure. Almost without exception, the young people I have met are indeed committed and engaged citizens of the world. President Kennedy would indeed be proud. In the interest of a scholarly discussion, I'm very happy to say that I have a supporting opinion on that hypothesis from an expert. One of today's panelists, Hannes Kloppe, right there to my left, sent me a copy of his recent book, Die Universität des 21. Jahrhunderts. He quotes a young blogger and startup entrepreneur. Früher bedeutete das Wort cool, dass man sich über nichts Gedanken macht und nichts kümmert. Aber genau das endet sich jetzt gerade. Plötzlich ist es cool, sich Gedanken zu machen, leidenschaftlich zu sein. Engagiert zu sein ist cool. Kreativ zu sein ist cool. Reale Dinge zu produzieren ist cool. And that means that education can make real differences. As I said, I had the honor of participating in the commencement ceremony yesterday at Ekla Bad. I quoted something that Federal Reserve Chairman Ben Bernanke said a week or so ago to the graduating class of another BARD partner in my home state of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Chairman Bernanke said, and I quote him, "The intellectual skills, creativity, and imagination that your work has fostered are the best possible preparation for the challenges of tomorrow," end of quote. The focus of the chairman's remarks was on adapting to technological and scientific trends, but he also discovered the importance of the arts and humanities in facilitating new and creative thinking. That kind of interdisciplinary study, he said, helps us to draw meaning that goes beyond the purely material aspects of our lives. And as in all commencement addresses, Ben Bernanke wished the class of 2013 all the best in facing the difficult but exciting challenges that lie ahead. I know that Professor, my dear friend Helmut Anheier, and Professor, another dear friend, Thomas Rommel, with the help of their respective institutions, are interested in continuing the agenda of our higher education reform, and I know that includes many of you here today, including Karen and many others. This includes developing, implementing, and supporting new models, both for institutions that offer liberal arts programs and for professional schools. This is an excellent way to build a bridge between satisfying the passion and thirst that young people have for knowledge and helping them to face the challenges of our increasingly complex world. Your role as educators is crucial to the better world that we all want. I encourage the representatives here today of universities and foundations and research institutes to join this think tank and to continue the discussion that we have started. Im Namen der US-Botschaft und ganz besonders im Namen meiner Kollegin Dr. Martina Kohl, Martina insbesondere, danken wir Ihnen, unseren Gastgebern, Partnern, Sprechern und Diskussionsteilnehmern für Ihr Engagement in dieser Diskussionsreihe über Hochschulbildung. Besonderen Dank gilt meinem Freund Hans Weiler, der diese Reihe ins Leben gerufen hat. Vielen Dank, Hans. Wie ich bereits gesagt habe, ist dies mein letztes Mal, aber ich weiß, dass Martina und mein Kollegen sicherstellen werden, dass die Botschaft auch weiterhin als Partner an diesem wichtigen Diskurs teilnehmen wird. Und vielen Dank für Ihre Aufmerksamkeit.
Your Excellency, it's still Your Excellency, ladies and gentlemen, it's my great honor and it's a pleasure to welcome you on behalf of the third institution that invited you to this event, after our hosts, the Hertie School of Governance and the American Embassy. I'm here as rector and provost of Eckler of Bad, a liberal arts university in Berlin, or to be precise, in Pankow. Eckler of Bad is a very small liberal arts college. Our students come from all over the world. They speak and are being taught in English, and they study for a BA in value studies. Small classes, a genuinely problem-oriented curriculum, and an academic program with social and cultural components aim to cultivate a sense of civic responsibility on a broad academic basis. The Eckler of Bad undergraduate liberal arts program educates young citizens who are engaged with the environment around them, equipped to ask critical questions about its shapes and norms, and who are in a position to contribute productively to its transformation. This approach is probably more unusual here than it is in the US, where even this isn't the norm, and admittedly it is somewhat unusual in Berlin-Pankow. Especially to discuss something, citizenship, in English, but it is to my mind a perfect embodiment of what is increasingly developing in Europe, not in competition with, but as an alternative to the high-quality, discipline-oriented education provided by the university, and that's an important point. And as a professor of literature, maybe I may use a literary example, because that's the only basis on which I feel really safe and secure. Shakespeare. Of course, Shakespeare. It had to be Shakespeare. The Taming of the Shrew, which will be on show here in Berlin next month, has this wonderful passage where a young man talks to a duke about the education of the duke's 2 daughters. You may remember that passage, or just brush up your memory. He says, "And toward the education of your daughters I here bestow a simple musical instrument and this small packet of Greek and Latin books. If you accept them, then their worth is great." Now, what do we have here? We have music and literature, interdisciplinarity. We have a small classroom, admittedly 2 students to a professor is very small and unaffordable. Okay, it's a luxury. Then there's diversity, clearly, because we have a male tutor and 2 female students. That's not the prototypical cohort of the 16th century classroom. We have an education that's based on a corpus of traditional texts set in a new context, possibly highlighting, if you like, the problem of translation. It is in all likelihood not discipline-specific, but theme-oriented and problem-based, which means that sweet discourse in society is taught. We have a set of subjects that are of intrinsic interest to the students, who will study them with joy and pleasure, one would assume, and therefore rather successfully. And we have the idea of an education that does not directly qualify for the job market, but that nevertheless is not an end in itself, but is rather useful. And the usefulness is a central and important ingredient. When we talk to parents, usefulness is not to be underestimated, not only in a Shakespearean context, and who later on will then continue and might even sort of think about more specialist studies. In short, this small passage from a play by Shakespeare, in this we have the nucleus of an interdisciplinary, problem-oriented liberal arts education. I admit it's somewhat of an abbreviation, but I think it's okay. In order to explore and develop the very idea of liberal arts in higher education, we'll need some kind of, if you like, concerted effort that goes beyond this nucleus and that goes beyond the discussion that we're having so far. And we need some kind of initiative to bring together representatives of German and American colleges and universities. And that's precisely what we're doing here. Such an initiative exists. It emerged, as we've heard, from a series of roundtable discussions under the auspices and the help, the generous support of the American Embassy and, if you like, academic institutions and research institutions here. Ambassador Murphy's input and active help, I think it's fair to say, cannot be underestimated in this context. And together with Hans Weiler, these 2 have been and will be, I hope I can say with some confidence, will in the future, 5 to 10 to 15 years, be instrumental in continuing this particular dialogue, and they will be the driving forces behind the very successful series of these meetings. One result of these talks so far is the emergence this spring of an initiative to foster the development of the liberal arts in Germany with a view to the US. This initiative aims at developing a dialogue between the two major strengths of the American and the European educational system: the tradition of liberal arts education in the American college and Humboldt's idea and concept of the unity of scholarship and teaching as developed in German universities. This dialogue, and I was quoting from the mission statement of that particular initiative that we formed this spring and that we'd like to invite you all to join and to actively contribute to, intellectually, not necessarily financially. This dialogue is exactly what scholars like Martha Nussbaum in the US, Martha Nussbaum, or our Dutch colleague Marijke van der Wende propose: an adequate concerted response to the demands that define the criteria for excellence in undergraduate education today. This is one of the goals of our conference today, and it's to engage interested scholars and leaders in higher education in a continuing dialogue on how we position ourselves in the context of the recent critical debate on the role of the liberal arts in the United States, and how some of the best traditions of European higher education can be revisited and possibly reactivated in new institutional and curricular models for liberal arts education. So, our roundtable on higher education today focuses, in the statements and the panel discussion, on the link between the liberal arts colleges and professional schools, and on the question of teaching citizenship and values. Let us now, to quote Shakespeare for a last time, have ample interchange of sweet discourse. And I'd like, with this last quotation, to ask Hans Weiler to continue from here with either the panel discussion right now, it's entirely up to you, or the food, that's your decision. Hans,